me the,
We are now live.
okay.
The meeting of the Safety and Development Committee will come to order. Let it be reflected that all members of the committee are present. First order of business is approval of the minutes of March 17th and April 22nd. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval of the minutes of the 17th of March and April
So moved.
22nd.
Is there a second?
I second.
Second,
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed? Carried. Then we move on to item D, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on your agenda. I'll turn this over to staff at this point for a discussion in the public portion of the meeting. And after that, we will go into closed session on these items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item that we're going to be discussing is the Cobalt project on South 70th Street with Scott Yack as president of Cobalt. There's two issues that we wanted to talk about to amend our current agreement. Currently, we have an agreement to develop about $84 million worth of development, and this could be increasing to well over 100 million, 130 million. The issue is that during the demolition, or after they acquired their property, they did an interior inspection that they were unable to do prior to purchase, and discovered about $2.6 million worth of additional asbestos and lead paint, mostly asbestos. They had did some things with asbestos that were kind of unique in that they put asbestos and insert them in between floors. So that it was pervasive throughout the building, and thus required a lot more cost to remediate, because now all that has to go to a toxic waste site. Because demolition by itself is not bankable, there isn't any collateral value in that. The developer came to the city and asked for an amendment to our financing. We currently have about 7.5 million in financing with the development on the east and west side of the city. So the first part is to amend the agreement to allow for an additional loan of 6.5 million. And we're proposing to break that loan down into half from the city and the other half through our fire board that we'll get into later. That has not yet been approved by the fire board, but will be presented to them. The other part of this project, Steve, if we could get to the closed session portion of the agenda, is the park issue. When the school board sold the park to the developer, the city then had to deal with the problem of how do we provide recreational amenities for the neighborhood. And so the city was able to secure from the developer 2 acres on the northern part of the development. And then the developer renegotiated that to what we think is a much better, almost 3 acres of development, sort of a vertical park in between the 2 large ends, and we'll show you that in just a minute here. Steve, I think you're almost there. And that's kind of where we're at. We held a neighborhood meeting to talk with the neighborhood about the project. I'll let the aldermen discuss their findings from that issue. So it's a 2-issue project. Is the we want to amend the park agreement to get more parkland, and we also want to amend the financing agreement to get 2.65 million. I would like to. We had some additional conditions to this. One of them is that they still owe $62 million in back taxes from March. And the other—
John, that's 62,000.
Excuse me.
I hope.
Excuse me, 62,000. Thank you, Peggy. And what we're going to be asking them is to put in an additional $300,000 in cash to be held by the city for next year's taxes in case there's a cost, in case there's a shortfall. And then also the developer would be required to maintain a $300,000 letter of credit. So we're putting some rather onerous conditions onto the developer for this particular project. And if I'd like to let our city treasurer and developer and finance manager, Peggy Settle, to make some comments.
So I think John kind of outlined, what the scenario is. We just looked at what the original development agreement looked like last year and what it looks like now with the changes in value and the delay in building the increment and doing the buildings. So we just want to make sure that the taxpayers are covered and protected through those debt service payments in the next couple of years so that there's not a shortfall that the taxpayers have to come back and pay. So those conditions are very important that he just mentioned to do that.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Weigel.
are we going to be going into details on this in closed session, obviously? Because I have some issues I wanted to talk about. I'll talk about what I can right now on the park from the public meeting, if now is the appropriate time, or
I think it's okay to talk about the park now, isn't it, John?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's fine. And whoever has control of the slides of the project was one of the first ones up there on the slides, and there was a picture of the or not a picture, but here the diagram of the park.
Yeah.
I want to bring that up.
A
So
little bit farther down, Steve.
that was right. Yeah, there it is.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
so, Mr. Chair, if I may, just to review that we, well, it seems like a long time ago. Was it 2 weeks ago on a Monday evening? We had a virtual meeting with, I believe there was 32 people online at one time on this, including the developer. And what we see there is the linear park in the middle was from earlier discussions was originally going to be 75 feet wide east to west, that long skinnier part. But the developer, for his own reasons, has stated that needs to be dropped down to 60 feet. That actually came as a surprise to me and staff also, I believe, at that meeting, that I was a little disappointed with. And I'll tell you the concerns that were raised. Some of the concerns that were raised were about the park were not even being addressed. It wouldn't be addressed at this point, like the use. There were concerns about basketball courts and whether or not there'd be a playground, but that's really not, that's all stuff that we can settle out later on. I think right now we're just looking at defining the boundaries of the park. And then also the possible future development, the scale of the buildings. Obviously the 75-foot reduction to 60 feet brings the new buildings closer to 72nd Street. Those buildings are described as being 2 stories tall, and the homeowners, and it's mostly homeowners on 72nd Street over there, are very concerned about the lack of call it the view shed that they have currently. Now they look out on a park and they're gonna be looking at apartment buildings. And there were some real concerns there, but I think in general, the meeting went well. Again, other than that unilateral surprise of dropping that. And I don't even know if this rendition, do we know if this rendition is showing that park width at 60 or 75? Because it might not seem like a lot, but if you understand that's the distance from the curb, not the distance from the sidewalk. So that's going to be the full width of that space. So dropping off that 15 feet really is going to have a drastic impact there on the feel there. So do we know if this rendition is showing that at 60 or 75 feet? Does Sean know, or?
I can't say what it is. I'm not sure what scale it was drawn to.
Yeah,
My guess is it was probably the 75 feet.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's right.
The architect that drew it is the one that told the developer that he wanted, that it was only 65 and not 75. So my bet is it's 60.
Yeah, I think now that I think about it, I think we're looking at the original rendition where that southern bulb, where it's marked as open green space, was square, and I think the second rendition, that southern bulb is more of a rectangle and does extend further east. So that southern what's labeled as open green space is actually going to be bigger. I think they made up some of that square footage loss by making that southern park area bigger. And again, it's labeled as open green space, but that actually, I don't think has been determined. That could be a playground. That could be, something else, I guess. But that's all stuff to be determined later. All in all, I think the public meeting went well. I have had contact, email and phone conversations with several of the people over there, some people that weren't there. I know that I sent some of them to YouTube to watch the meeting, and nobody has called me after viewing it on YouTube that couldn't attend the meeting. So I'd say that meeting went well. There's still some issues that I think that need to be addressed, but I think those would be more appropriate in closed session.
Are there any other comments on the park at this point?
Mr. Chairman,
Alderman Road.
is this the appropriate time to talk about the scale of the buildings regarding that park, i.e. the height?
There'll be 2 stories on the front and then a 3-story back.
That's what I wanted to discuss, John,
Yes.
because the developer is selling us on these are 2-story buildings, and the rendition, the storyboards or whatever he's showing are 3 stories, and he's telling us 2 stories, but the architect is saying they're 2 stories with attic space. So they're 3 stories. We're again being told something totally different, and I don't know if the neighbors across the street on the west side of that street grasped that.
Yeah, I think that was discussed at the neighborhood meeting, that the fronts of the building are going to be 2 stories along 72nd Street. And then after that first 2 rows of apartments, then they'll step up to 3 stories.
Mr. Chair,
Alderman Weigel.
we're not actually approving the design of these buildings today.
No.
No, we can certainly address that. No plans have been submitted to staff or the
Right.
plan commission yet for review. All we've seen is some very general kind of pictures, because I'm going to concur with Alderman Rowe. I have some real concerns about the scale, especially when you consider that on that where you see that linear park area there, and the future development actually sits above the level of the street. So by 6 or 8 feet, and I don't believe that they're planning on removing hundreds of cubic yards of soil to bring that whole grade that site down to so it's level with the street. So these, what we're going to call euphemistically 2-story buildings, are actually be sitting up above the level of the 2-story buildings that are across the street. So they're starting with like a 6-foot advantage. And I believe that there's some sort of attic or some sort of decorative treatment, at least, that makes the 2-story buildings even taller than that. So, but again, that's not something we're not approving anything today on that. We're just looking at essentially the park boundary and the financing package.
That is correct.
That is correct.
Yes.
Okay, I stand corrected.
No,
Sorry.
I'm fine. We're willing to fight. We can fight that battle later, Dan. I'm with you on that. So,
Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Any other discussion? Questions? If not, John, you want to move on to the next one?
Yes. Patrick, if you want to talk about that one quickly. The 102nd National, we're taking a look at the TIF district that we created for the Holiday Inn Express, and we may want to broaden those boundaries, and that's kind of what we want to talk about. We don't want to get into an open session as to what properties we might want to include, but that's basically what we're trying to do, is look at broadening that horizon.
Okay.
Patrick, if you wouldn't mind telling me what slide number you're,
Don't worry about it. We go to the next item.
Yeah.
okay.
That's about all we know on that one. On item number 4, Mr. Chairman, on 1111 West Greenfield after the old Pick and Save site, we want to talk about that site as it relates to the Highway 100 study. And we also want to talk about the broader neighborhood as to how we might influence the revitalization of that neighborhood, and what land mass should be included in any potential project that we might want to discuss. So that's what the issue was on that one. And then on the final one, discussion relative to the market, which is on National Avenue, north and south of National Avenue on Six Points Crossing. The Aurora Medical Clinic is completed, and the apartments are nearly all completed, and they're almost all rented. I think about 94% of them are already rented, so they're doing really well. But we want to talk about the south side of what additional development that might want to occur and what kind of financing options that they're looking at. And that's about all we have for that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then we can proceed into closed session.
Yes, sir.
For agenda items 2 through 5, the committee will entertain a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to the provisions of section 19.85, parent 1, parent E of the state statutes for the purpose of deliberating the investing of public funds whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. The committee will reconvene in open session after completion of the closed session to consider the balance of the agenda. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second, Weigel.
Alderman Haas,
Aye.
Alderman Weigel,
Aye.
Alderman Keene,
Aye.
Alderman Tenario,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. We are now in closed session. So wait until the YouTube is off.